Something pretty significant happened in Tasmania's Parliament last night. Let's talk about it. At some point, we, all of us, learn the history of Nazism in Germany, and more broadly, the history of fascism in Europe, and the evil that took place before and during the Second World War. We learn about what was lived, what was experienced, what was suffered, what was perpetrated only one generation back. There were the battlefields, of course, and Australia learned a lot about that as our troops went away and fought in Africa, in Asia, the Pacific, and Europe, where all too many people died. But then there were the atrocities that were being visited upon civilians at the same time. Jewish people, gay people, people living with disability, gypsies, concentration camps and gas chambers established to allow the industrial-scale murder of millions of men, women and children. And all of that happened under the symbol of the swastika, appropriated by the Nazi Party. And their salute to each other was the outstretched arm, palm flat down. So as I mentioned in my introduction, something significant happened in Parliament yesterday. Tasmania became the first state in Australia to ban the Nazi salute. And the first place, I'm told, outside of Europe to do so. The display of Nazi symbols has also been made illegal too. The penalty for doing it, fines that could total $3,600, jail sentences that could lead to 3 months of incarceration. You've got to ask yourself the question, don't you? What would possess somebody to physically show a Nazi salute? What would be in that person's mind? Who knows? But it happened recently at a soccer match in Sydney in March, and it happened at a protest in Melbourne in May. It happens. There's a great release in a government, or a great line rather, in a government press release from yesterday. It asks you to imagine the significant and terrifying impact that these symbols have and why they don't belong in our society. So what happens if you ban them? Does it make things better? We're going to talk about it coming up for you in just a moment. Our guest, Mr. Dvir Abramovich, the Director of the Program in Jewish Culture and Society at the University of Melbourne, the Chairman of the Anti-Defamation Commission. So Tasmania has passed a law. It bans the Nazi salute, the display of symbols. I wonder how he felt when that changed yesterday. You'll find out in a moment.
On ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania. Mornings with Leon Compton.
Mr. Dvir Abramovich, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Lovely to see you in the studio. How did you feel yesterday when a bill was sent off to the Governor for assent that would have banned, or that will ban, in this state, at the display of the Nazi salute?
Yeah, this was a day for the history books, and today Tasmania is a much better state, and I'm sure that the bells of democracy and freedom and equality and respect are ringing loud through every single city and town. It was a glorious and triumphant moment, and it's been a long and taxing journey for me over 7 years, arguing for this. And I have to tell you that sitting there in Parliament watching, I did shed some tears of joy, but I knew one thing, Leon, that standing shoulder to shoulder with me were the brave diggers who sacrificed their lives to defeat the Third Reich, the 6 million Jewish victims that were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators, and, of course, the Holocaust survivors who escaped the inferno of Europe and rebuilt their lives here in Tasmania. This was a day that every Tasmanian should be proud. And I want to congratulate Elise Archer, the Attorney General, the government, but also the elected representatives that voted and took the high moral ground. There's a very important message here. And I want to just say the message is this. The message is unmistakable and unequivocal to the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. The law is no longer on your side. Tasmania will never again be a safe shelter and a haven for your murderous genocidal ideology. And I think your listeners should remember what the symbol that you spoke about and what the Nazi salute represents.
Because it was an interesting line in the press release from Elise Archer, and it described it well, so I've appropriated it here. She talked about the significant and terrifying impact that these symbols have. I mean, can you share how that might feel?
Of course, the neo-Nazis have weaponized both the swastika and the Nazi salute to sow fear and to intimidate. And let's remember what they represent. When somebody is carrying a Nazi flag or doing the Nazi salute, what it symbolizes is the pushing of mothers clutching to their babies into the gas chambers. It represents the murder of 1.5 million children. It represents the taking of families into open fields and executing them. Neo-Nazism is an exterminist policy. These people who march in the streets of Melbourne and in other cities doing the Nazi salute, they fantasize about an Australian Hitler. They imagine an area in Australia without Jews, Muslims, members of the LGBTIQ plus community, the disabled, anybody who doesn't fit into the warped Aryan worldview. And Brenton Tarrant, who massacred 51 worshippers in Christchurch, was fueled and driven by those symbols. So what happened yesterday, I think, was a remarkable moment.
So there's a perception, Dvir Abramovich, that there seems to be more of this at the moment rather than less. Do you think that's accurate? And how do you answer the question, why?
Well, it's absolutely accurate, and we know that the neo-Nazis have made a concerted decision to take their online activity into the real world. And they're doing it by marching in the streets. As you mentioned, they were on the steps of Parliament House in Victoria, whether they're doing it at soccer matches. They are making a statement, we are here. And I don't want to be too dramatic about this, Leon, but this is really a fight between good and evil. A democracy is not just about the rights that we have. It's about what we are willing to tolerate. What does it say about the Tasmanian community who says we are happy and comfortable with the symbols of extermination, genocide, and dehumanization?
How do you feel about the prospect that in some Western democracies there's all too much accommodation for people of this ideology? I think about the line from Donald Trump over a protest in which people died in the US. There was wrong on both sides. How much accommodation do you think these views are getting in Australian political life at the moment?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump was never the barometer for morality, and I condemned him when he came out with that terrible statement. There is no equivocation here. The neo-Nazis are about a genocidal, murderous ideology. I have not seen in the mainstream political sphere anybody who would support maintaining the laws as they are. And, we launched a campaign back in January, I, along with a group of Holocaust survivors, calling on the Victorian government to ban the Nazi salute. But I'm very proud that it's Tasmania who is leading the way, not just in this country, but across the world. And I think every single politician will be looking at what happened yesterday and taking the lead. And I'm hoping that this will be replicated across the state.
Julia says via text this morning, and if you've just jumped in the car, my guest is Mr. Dvir Abramovich, the Director of the Program in Jewish Culture and Society at the University of Melbourne and Chairman of the Anti-Defamation Commission. Yesterday, Tasmania passed a law that bans a Nazi salute and the display of Nazi memorabilia in this state. The ban, says Julia, will make these views and groups more attractive and exciting to some people. Could she be right?
She's absolutely wrong. The neo-Nazis and the white supremacists don't need anybody to be attracted. They've been using these symbols. They've been using this as a rallying cry to actually attract disaffected young men and women to their very dangerous cause. And what the Parliament did yesterday was to declare in one voice, we will never stand for the emblem of inhumanity. We are better than that. It's not who we are as a people. And of course, as I said before, it's also a booming tribute to our diggers. They will be rolling in their grave knowing that Australian society is accommodating and willing to accept these symbols of evil.
On Mornings Around Tasmania, thank you for your text. Hi. The swastika is an ancient symbol. What happens to religions that use it? There's an answer for that in the bill that's being passed, and it acknowledges specifically, and I've cut and pasted it into my script, it acknowledges the importance of the ancient swastika to the Buddhist, Hindu and Jain communities. The bill explicitly states that the offence does not apply to the display of a swastika in connection with Buddhism, Hinduism or Jainism. How in practicality do you think this will work? As I mentioned, in May, in Melbourne, in March, amongst Croatian fascists or fascist sympathisers at a soccer match. If that happened in Tasmania, what would happen next now?
So first of all, I think the law strikes the right balance. It's sensible. It provides exemptions for artistic, for cultural, for educational purposes, but it also makes a differentiation between the Hindu and Judean symbols and the Nazi swastika. By the way, Leon, there are clear differences. There are distinguishing features between the Nazi swastika and the other swastikas. Now, if somebody is displaying this kind of symbol, I trust and I have faith in the police that they will be able to say, okay, this is not a Nazi swastika, this is a religious symbol. Victoria last year passed a similar law banning the public displays of the Nazi swastika. We've had 0 cases of people misreporting. And if they do, it will be investigated. That is a side issue. I mean, the focus should be on denazifying Tasmania. And I don't want to scare your viewers, your listeners, but the white supremacist movement is not going away. And you only need one lone individual listening to the poisonous rhetoric that they are spewing to believe that the white race is under extinction and to go and do something. We know one thing, where white supremacists gather, violence usually follows. We've had white supremacist shootings across the world, both in Europe and in North America. And we know one thing, they're being radicalized by those symbols.
You're on Mornings Around Tasmania. Will it apply? I mean, if police are called out to an incident and they find a swastika displayed in someone's bedroom, will they be breaking the law?
So there was a question that was debated in Parliament yesterday, and as I understand it, and I don't want to misrepresent what the Attorney General, if it's a public display, and I think the public display is something outside the home, I mean, this doesn't actually criminalise the possession of those items.
And indeed, it doesn't criminalise the trade in those items. We had a case only recently where people are selling and buying Nazi memorabilia, something that is still not illegal.
Leon, 2 weeks ago, Daniel Elizabeth in Queensland had more than 200 items of Nazi memorabilia. One of them, and I think your listeners may not believe me, was an atrocity album. An atrocity album of Jews being executed, of dead bodies, which sold for nearly $4,000. So there are very sick people out there who are buying Hitler daggers and Hitler Youth memorabilia. The federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, and I was at the press conference with him a few weeks ago, has announced that the federal government will now ban the trafficking in Nazi memorabilia in these blood-soaked tools of the devil. So I'm happy.
So the federal government have said they will intervene. It's not something that can be done at state level. The federal government have said they will ban this trade.
That's right. And again, this goes very much to the core and to the moral fabric. You know, we operate in a moral ecology, Leon. And I think it's very important that people understand that the law that we saw passed yesterday is about who we are as Tasmanians and who we are as Australians.
It's interesting. We operate in a moral ecology, but we also operate in a broader society. And I'm wondering if what's drawing these disaffected white men largely are broader issues about dispossession and about poverty and about a feeling of disenfranchisement that requires a wider political approach to trying to reduce the attraction of them being drawn to this ideology, which sort of preys on grievance?
It's a good question, although I have to say that we have to remember that in the Wannsee Conference of 1942, where they actually mapped out the final solution, 15 of those, out of the 15 men who were there, 8 had PhDs from Berlin's leading universities. Anti-Semitism, neo-Nazism is not about the riffraff. I'm not going to give a free pass and a cover to anybody who is promoting and advocating an exterminist policy that says we have to murder Jews and Australian Asians and the indigenous. We do need to have an educational campaign, I think, to reach out. But a lot of those people are filled with hate. And I think the way to fight back is to make sure that law enforcement, but also to strip them of their ability to campaign and to promote on this. Just want to say one more thing. A day before he committed suicide, 29th of April 1945, Hitler leaves his last will and testament. And he makes a prediction. He says it will take centuries for anti-Semitism and Nazism to return into the public sphere. He figured that after all the atrocities, people will be so shocked that they will never approach it again. He was wrong. Nazism didn't die in the bunker with Hitler. It's alive and well here in Australia, and we have to push back against this. It is dangerous. And I think, again, the steps that were taken yesterday, it's not the magic bullet. It's not a recipe, but it will go a long way to actually making sure that we are disempowering a white supremacist movement.
It'll be interesting to see if and when these laws come into contact with people breaking them. and let's hope that doesn't happen. But it'll be interesting to see when these laws start to get tested in the courts, how it will play out. Interestingly, tattoos. So if you've got a swastika tattooed on your neck, that is not, as far as I can read in this bill, a breaking of the law. So that will be... It was interesting that was avoided specifically in this bill.
It's a thunderous blow to the solar plexus of the neo-Nazi movement in Australia, which is, by the way, trying to insert itself into the conversation. We saw it during lockdowns. They were infiltrating anti-vax and anti-lockdown groups and, promoting the old conspiracy theories that it was Jews. But we are now seeing them as an anti-trans movement. They are very smart and savvy when it comes to putting themselves into the debate. And that's why we have to be very much aware and awake to the threat that they pose. This is a whole of society challenge. It won't be just solved by the laws being passed yesterday, but it is a significant step. Really a day for the history books.
It's been great to see you in the studio this morning. Thank you for coming in. Dr. Dvir, your proper appellation, Dr. Dvir Abramovich, Chair of the Anti-Defamation Commission on Mornings Around Tasmania. Thanks for your time.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.